Morning, everybody. My name is Karen Cloyd. I am one of the co-chairs of West County Democrats. We are so glad you could make it to our meeting, our virtual meeting this morning. I'd like to ask you, first of all, to please silence your cell phone so we won't have any extraneous noise. I had the foresight to put my dog in a closed room this morning so she won't be barking at the FedEx trucks like she's known to do. We have a full agenda this morning, so I think we will get right to it. Let's start with our membership report. Gay?
All righty, this will be short. We currently have 102 paid members, and as I mentioned last meeting, that compares to our 2020 where we had 117. So since we've been doing everything virtual, I think we've done pretty well. And I encourage everyone to keep in mind that our renewal of dues, I think we start in October, November. So $20 a year.
We'll be hitting you up for 2020 dues next month. Okay.
2020.
21.
21.
22.
21, 22.
We'll get it.
All right. Treasurer's report, Jan.
Hi. Well, we didn't meet in August, so I have July's. I'll start with July. And we had a beginning balance of $5,815.89. We had a revenue of $151. It was $120 in dues and $31 in donations. We had disbursements of $718.11. We had the expenses for the outdoor meeting was $287.32. Expenses for the award plaque was $176.70. Honorariums $200. And then an error by the bank, they charged us $54.09 for some some checks that were incorrect, and those charges are being reversed. Our ending balance was $5,248.78. And then in August, there was no income and no expenses. So we had a beginning balance of $5,248.78 and an ending balance of $5,248.78.
Okay. Thank you, Jan. It is our hope that at some point we can resume meeting in person. We're hoping for November. We will let you know for certain. Our October meeting more than likely will be on Zoom unless there is something extraordinary that occurs and all the unvaccinated people get vaccinated, which I don't foresee that happening. But we're shooting for November a in-person meeting, but like I said, we'll have to see. I'm hesitant to be in a crowded room with unmasked people. I'm not real crazy about being in a room with masked people. So we will have to see how that progresses. Next, we have announcements. I know Representative Tracy McCreary is joining us today. Feel free to unmute yourself, Tracy. And, if you would like to make your announcement to us, we're ready to listen.
Awesome. Thank you for your hospitality, Karen. I really appreciate the group letting me join you by Zoom this morning. This is maybe the first time I'm saying this out loud, so it's kind of exciting. I had a chance to scroll through the gallery a little bit, and I see some faces on here that I have known for not just years, but decades at this point. So I just appreciate your hospitality this morning because I am going to be running for the Missouri State Senate. As all of you know, I am a super senior in the Missouri legislature. I feel like that should involve some kind of a cape and a badge or something, but I'm actually in year 8 in the Missouri House. I have one more year left. So I came in a special in 2011. And since that time, I've been working so hard to stand up for seniors and consumers and working families. And I'm just really looking forward to taking my energy and my experience and my passion over to the Missouri State Senate. I'm going to be running for State Senator Jill Shoup's spot in the Missouri Senate. No, I'm not running against Senator Shoup. She is also termed out of the Missouri Senate, and I'm going to be running for her open spot. I do have Senator Shoup's endorsement and full support, which means the world to me. That has really just given me so much more, even more wind beneath my wings as I go forward in this campaign. I have a reputation in Missouri legislature of being a very passionate progressive, but I also have the ability to work with people from the other side of the aisle. And I also have been able to work with people in both the House and the Senate chambers. So, but I don't want any of you to mistake that because I have the ability to work well with others, that means that I'm a pushover or that I'm not going to stand up. I'm committed to trying to work with people on the other side of the aisle and in both chambers to get things done, but I'm not going to back down on the things that are so important to me and so important to you as members of the West County Democrats. So I hope that you understand. In my opinion, I've been doing that in the House this entire time, and I intend to carry that over into the Missouri Senate. So depending on what happens with redistricting, there's a possibility that Senator Shoup's seat is the only seat that the Senate Democrats are going to be really focused on next year. So you have my commitment that I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that we don't lose that seat. Just a political reminder, and Anita will probably remember this. 12 years ago, we had a pretty ugly Democratic primary for this state Senate seat. And what ended up happening is it made it much easier for a Republican, John Lamping, to win the general election. So I'm really committed to making sure that we as Democrats stay focused on who we really need to be running against, and that is the Republican. This district is one of the few competitive Senate districts in the state. So I don't want to lose sight of the importance of being a candidate that can actually win in November. So that's what I'm committed to doing. So thank you for letting me say this out loud. I announced my candidacy in June, but this is the first time I'm saying it out loud. So thank you for, I see a lot of smiles and head nodding. It feels good to be among friends. Thank you so much.
Okay, one question. That's Senate district, is it 24?
It is 24. So next year in 2022, all of the districts that end up with an even number are going to be up. So now that doesn't mean, we've seen shenanigans in the past, like when, this is kind of a good one, when the Republicans wanted to get rid of Jane Cunningham, a Republican, they changed her district number and she sort of ended up like in no person's land. So there are political games that happen, but we anticipate that this Senate seat will still be an even number. It's been Senate District 24 for decade upon decade. So next year, any senator who's either in an even district, actually all the even numbers will be up for re-election next year.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Tracy. We wish you luck.
Thank you.
We also have a message, an announcement from Trish Gunby. Trish, can you unmute yourself and you have the floor?
Thank you, Karen. Hi, everybody. Trish Gunby, I'm state rep in District 99. I have made the announcement that I'm running for Congress in Missouri's 2nd Congressional District. So excited about that. Before I just speak a little bit about it, I do want to lift up Representative McCreary. She is the ranking minority leader or the chair on utilities that I serve on with her. And truly her leadership, just not in that committee, but on the House floor in general. All freshmen, actually our whole caucus looked to her. So I'm so excited that she's running for Senator Shoup's seat. I know she'll make a great senator. So happy to follow her for sure. I announced in August, and so I'm a little over a month into my campaign. We have already knocked 1,600 doors. I was in the Manchester Parade this weekend. I had a booth in Manchester Homecoming all weekend. I'm in the Kirkwood Green Tree Festival Parade. So just trying to take in as many events to meet as many folks as I can, because obviously there's a lot of people who need to meet me outside the 99. So while we don't know what those boundaries look like, we know that this area is probably going to be the central core of that district. So we are just working from the center outward. And then once we know what those boundaries look like in the dead of winter, we will be on doorsteps introducing ourselves to folks. One thing I just want to mention, I don't know if anybody attended Manchester Homecoming this weekend, but I want to share this with all the township groups, any of these types of Democratic groups. At Manchester Homecoming this weekend, there were 3 very conservative groups who tabled there, who had booths. The Lafayette Township Republicans had a booth, Convention of States had a booth, and the John Birch Society had a booth. And I was the only Democratic leaning, person. And I had a number of people who came over to my booth and said, well, we're happy that I was there to begin with, but I don't know if this group, if you all and others like you, I strongly feel that we need to make a concerted effort to be present at these types of events, because obviously Republicans are going to start doing that, and right-leaning groups, they marched in the parade as well. They had a float or a car or whatever. But it's concerning to me to see the number of people who go to those booths, and folks are coming to me asking, where are the Democrats? And so as a candidate, I obviously can't be in all places at all times, but I think it would be great if you all talked about that, and all the different townships, whether you did it individually as a township or West County Dems, whatever that looks like. But I just want to bring that kind of to the forefront. And I think that's something that in 2022 would be a tremendous help, just to get the Democratic brand out in front of people, especially in redder areas, so that people realize that we do have a presence. And so people who are at these events feel like they have a safe place to come talk, because I had a lot of people who stopped by to help, volunteer for my campaign and such, but really just we're kind of there as a therapy, basically. So anyway, just putting that out there. Go to my website, trishgunby.com. Obviously, we're recruiting volunteers. I'm raising money, and I got to raise $6 million. That's what Jill Shoup raised.
Oh my word.
Ann Wagner spent $11 million on this race. 14 months, that's the only time we have. So I believe we can flip it. I believe I can win. I'm working my tail off, but I need your help. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Trish. And I won't get on my soapbox about campaign finance reform, but yeah, that's evident why it is needed, because think of what we could do otherwise with $6 million. Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have the program report.
Okay,
Elaine?
thank you. Good morning, everybody. And in relation to that, of course, we have Anita Mannion speaking a little bit later, but we are very fortunate that Trish has agreed to be our guest speaker for next month, and I thank you so much for that. We look forward to hearing from you in greater detail. We also are contacting and reaching out to people like Show Me Integrity Organization, International Institute, checking into what will be going on in the area in relation to the relocation of Afghan refugees, and thinking back to what an outstanding job the St. Louis area and International Institute did when the large Bosnian group who have become a really important part of our St. Louis community and a positive force for our economic development, et cetera. So we certainly look forward to that. We also will be inviting some people back that have been requested, including Tony Messenger. And I hope that all of you are subscribing to the newspaper and reading his columns every week as well. We also are open and would appreciate it if you would just email me or call me with any person you would like for us to reach out to be a future speaker. in the coming year, especially if you have contact information for them or a topic that we haven't touched on recently that you think is very current that you'd like us to pursue. So we appreciate your participation in it, and we are working on the future months. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine.
Pardon me?
I was seeing if we had a question. Maureen, are you here? Yes. Did you have a question?
I was just writing in the chat. I think that, I don't know how it would be that how decisions are made in West County Democrats, if this has to go to the committee, to the executive committee, to be sure that we're at the Manchester, we have a booth in Manchester next year, because it's going to be, I think it's always in September. I mean, I'd almost be willing to help on that. But does it need to be approved? Because we absolutely need to be there. And if we can have our candidates there as well, whoever's running for the 99 and like Trish for the 2 and stuff. I think it's mandatory that we do that.
Yeah.
You're a bigger presence in Chesterfield Township. You know, maybe we could even combine. I haven't, you know, talked to Chesterfield. So I don't know. It's really disconcerting that people would go to a John Birch. I didn't even know they were still around.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, that's my comment. I was just typing it into chat. So take it, whoever wants to take that up and figure it out, that'd be great.
We'll work on that, and we'll contact you, Maureen, and we really need to work on visibility.
Yep,
have
we do.
stuff in play in the works even before, you know, next calendar year. Well, certainly.
Agree. And in fact, Trish, do you know other townships that have anything going on? It's a little late for this cycle, but maybe, like you said, you were going to be in Kirkwood, anywhere in the county. I honestly believe we need to be there with a booth.
Yeah,
So
I
maybe
know.
Trish offline, you could get that to me or whatever.
Yeah, Green Tree Festival, I believe, I've been in contact with Dennis Roach. And so they do a booth for the Democrats, and I was able to put out literature before. So I don't know, you know, I know my own little area, but I would
Yes.
imagine Chesterfield. I mean, we just need to, I feel like anything in the St. Louis metro region
Yep.
that is a carnival or a festival and allows for booths, we need a presence there.
Yeah, we do.
Thankfully, at the state fair this year, the Missouri Dems had a booth, and they haven't had that for years, because especially in areas where there hasn't been a Democratic candidate for such a long
Correct.
time, people don't even think that the party's active. So I don't know if there's a way we can find a list or compile a list, but that's what I would probably start doing, is even contacting individual municipalities and finding out what offerings they have. Maybe a way to start.
Well, go ahead and run this up the executive, because once the decision's made that we want to do this, then we can start formally exploring it. And I'll contact Dennis Roach, I know him. And then we can go from there, because anything in West County area needs to have, in fact, we could get more members this way too. We'd sign them up on the spot. So we may get ourselves more members. So anyway, that's my comments. I don't want to, got a full agenda, but I wanted to get that out there.
You, Helena, did you have a question?
I just wanted to join in with Maureen to say that this is a great idea. Being a committee person on a very, very, very small Democratic club where we have trouble attracting members or even people knowing we exist, it's hard to, as you know, as a very small group, it's hard to take on a lot of other responsibilities besides trying to run the group. If this group was sort of like just an organizer and helped have a booth and invite the townships, I think they'd be very happy to support and show up. It's just, as you know, we're all trying to do many things and stretch pretty thin. So I think this is an amazing idea. I'm not really aware of these events usually, as even in my own community, like in Baldwin, they had Baldwin Days this year. They haven't had it. They didn't have it for 2 years. They had it this year. You know, finding that stuff out and just knowing about it and having a place to gather. I think more Democrats would come to those events for visibility if they knew they had a little support system of a couple of other people to stand with.
Yeah, maybe West County Democrats could be like an umbrella group of sorts. We'll get on that. Okay, excellent ideas. I'm not opposed to standing at a booth and answering questions. Like if Dennis, if we want to do something for Wildwood, whatever it is, celebrate Wildwood later on this month, we could do that if it's not too late to do something like that. Okay, all righty. Elaine, would you care to introduce our speaker?
I would be honored to do so. As some of you may remember, Anita spoke to us about a year ago, and she's such an outstanding source. We were very pleased that she agreed to come again. She's assistant professor in political science at UMSL. She is also a political consultant on KSDK. Her background is so interesting and outstanding. We included her background on the monthly notice, so I won't take any more time than this and give her all the time she would like. So we welcome you again, Anita.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. My plan is to take the same approach as last time, maybe present several topics over 30 minutes or so, and then leave most of the time left for Q&A and discussion. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and open up this presentation. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, you know, we planned this about a month or so ago with the knowledge that everything was going to be changing and crazy. And so I always have a general outline, but wait until sort of a couple of days before to really solidify the topics because things change so quickly. So what I thought we would talk about today is Biden's agenda, a couple of his big legislative items he's trying to get accomplished, midterm elections, and including the census and redistricting, how that all fits together, what's going on with Medicaid expansion in Missouri, and of course, a discussion about what is happening with reproductive rights in this country. So yeah, I'm sure we've all been thinking about that. So when it comes to Biden's agenda, he has sort of had this half a victory so far in getting the Senate to pass a bipartisan infrastructure plan. So that bill, which is about $1 trillion, passed the Senate with 69 votes, 19 Republicans voted yes. So that's a win for Biden in the fact that he wants to get infrastructure done. And it's really important to him that there is some bipartisan aspect of this. But it still needs to pass the House. In some ways, that's ironic because the House is where the Democrats have more control, but there's a lot of issues at play here. The Democrats have a very narrow margin in the House, and so far, many progressives have not publicly committed to voting yes on the bipartisan bill. There is a lot of leverage and negotiating contention within the Democratic Party, particularly push and pull between the progressive and moderates regarding this bill and the next bill that we're going to talk about, the larger one. And then, although there was a lot of support in the Senate, including from the minority leader, in the House, it's the opposite. The minority leader has voiced opposition. Trump is pressuring people to vote no. The House Freedom Caucus is threatening to primary those who vote yes. And so in this bill that has passed the Senate so far, about half of the spending is new spending and about half is renewing existing infrastructure spending. So it definitely was a downgrade and compromise from what Biden originally wanted. A big focus on this is rebuilding roads and bridges, funding climate resilience, broadband initiatives, investing in airports and Amtrak, updating the electricity grid, removing lead pipes, sort of that old school what we think of as those kind of, you know, boots on the ground, shovels shovel-ready infrastructure. So Pelosi has a real challenge here. She has to get moderates and progressives to vote on both packages. And the progressives in the House are saying they're not going to vote on this one until there's a vote on the larger one. A lot of moderates and a lot of Republicans saying that they're hesitant to tie those two packages together. So she's really trying to thread the needle here. And she says she will bring this bipartisan bill to the floor by September 27th. One of the concerns is the funding or the contributions to the deficit. So the CBO says that it'll add about $250 billion to the deficit. So it won't pay for itself as it's kind of been claimed. This is, and I actually thought I might go ahead and click on this animation because I think it's worth looking at. So this shows what was originally, I'm a member, come on. What is originally planned for the infrastructure bill, and then what the compromise was. So this shows the original proposal and how it shrunk down for what they ended up coming away with. So I'll put that again. This was Biden's original proposal that was about 2.6 billion. And so, or trillion. And so this shows these are in billions, so it was 2.6 trillion, and these were things that were in the original proposal. After all the negotiations it took to get this passed, it shrunk down to this. So the focus came away from houses, schools, community-based care, research and development, clean energy shrunk a lot. And what you have are sort of those more traditional infrastructure factors left. So what did the Democrats respond with? Well, that's fine. We can do this smaller bill, but then we need, in addition, this larger infrastructure plan. And this is the one they plan on passing through reconciliation, which they can only do once in the fiscal year. It's a way to avoid the filibuster and pass with a 51 majority, but that's all that the Democrats have in the Senate. So they can't lose a single vote, including, if you watch any of the Sunday shows this weekend, Joe Manchin. Right. And so what's in this larger package includes things like universal pre-K, a child care benefit to try to help offset the cost of child care for lower and middle income families, free community college, investment to increase the Pell Grant and funding for HBCUs, adding dental, vision, and hearing to Medicare, trying to lower prescription drug prices, closing the ACA gap and increasing some of those subsidies, and lots of focus on clean energy and climate change. To pay for those, there was just some information. Of course, we haven't seen a finalized bill for this, but some information was put out just this morning on what the taxes to pay for this bill might be. And so far, what we know is consistent with what the Democrats have been saying all along, that they would raise taxes on those earning over $400,000 a year, and with an additional surtax for those who earn over $5 million a year. That they would increase taxes on capital gains, increases taxes on businesses who earn over $5 million a year, taxes on tobacco, regulations on cryptocurrency. And so they expect all of these pools and some additional pools of money that they're working on to total about 2.9 of the $3.5 trillion. Then they say the rest of that will be funded through increased economic activity. So that dynamic scoring they do to try to project what, maybe if childcare is more affordable, there'll be more, particularly women in the labor force, and how that might increase the economy and offset some of those costs. So they're saying that this will be fully funded. Joe Manchin, this weekend, some of the things he was talking about in his op-ed, he was pretty vague, just kind of saying the 3.5 million was too much. But this weekend, he did identify a little more specifically concerns about the deficit and inflation that could result. He expressed concerns about the child tax credits, extending them. He wants to put a lot of parameters on there, including means testing that and possibly putting work requirements on the child tax credit. So those could be real sticking points when the progressives hear that. And he is against the carrots and sticks for clean energy coming from a coal state. He has definitely some reservations about that. And also, I think, some concerns about capital gains taxes and other tax increases. On the flip side, Senator Sanders was out yesterday saying, that's non-negotiable, that their plan was originally 6 trillion and they've already negotiated down. So again, it's up to the leaders. Biden and his team are definitely doing a lot of behind the scenes work on this. Pelosi says she hopes to have a draft of this plan by September 15th. So this is trying to make all of her membership happy to have the bigger plan drafted by the 15th to bring the bipartisan bill to the floor by the 27th. Schumer says he also wants to have a vote by the end of the month on this bigger plan. Manchin explicitly talked about that yesterday and said he knows that he won't have my vote on a $3.5 million package. So the Democrats definitely still have work to do. These could be huge political gains, just beyond what the actual benefits to the country could be when you talk about that really kind of crass political calculus. These two bills could provide a lot of benefits to a lot of Americans. And we saw the bipartisanship around the first one, which I think a lot of people would feel good about, actually seeing parties coming together and getting something done, a real unicorn. But with that expectation that that's going to happen, if this falls through because the Democrats can't agree within their own party, I think that's going to cause some real problems. So let's hope that they can figure out how to get this through. When it comes to support from Americans, this polling was done on August 7th through 10th. And pretty much all the polls that I'm going to show you today, the margin of error is plus or minus 3%. Do you favor or oppose the U.S. Senate's infrastructure package that would allocate my blocks there, but I assume this says, $1 trillion for U.S. roads, bridges, rail service, drinking water, and expanded broadband internet access? So that bipartisan bill of 62% said they favor it. When it comes to the $3.5 trillion bill, the first one's 62, the second one's 56. So less support for the bigger bill, but still a majority of Americans supporting that larger spending bill. Another big issue I'm sure you're very aware of that the Biden administration is dealing with, which has been their priority since day one, is fighting the pandemic, as was mentioned by some of the folks who spoke earlier, trying to make it so we can get back to our lives. I too am hesitant to be in a room with unmasked people, hence here we are on Zoom. And so according to the Mayo Clinic, I think that I looked at this on Friday, we see that 46.2% of Missourians are fully vaccinated. Not great, right? So that's better for those ages 65 and over. We have about 82%, but in my age group there, only about half of Missourians are vaccinated. Just over 53% have one dose. If we look at the country, you can see here, the darker it is, the higher percentage of that state is vaccinated. So Missouri is slightly better than those other states in the South we're usually lumped in with, but still not where we need to be. If we look at the country as a whole, you hear different numbers on this. So these, I'm just staying with the Mayo Clinic's numbers. Theirs are done as a percentage of population, but it's not done as a percentage of those 12 and up. So there are some people, probably a lot of you have kids and grandkids who are under 12 and can't be vaccinated yet. So that is included in the statistics for this population. So overall in the US, 63% of our population has one dose and 54% are fully vaccinated. So in response to this really stagnation of vaccinations that we've had, Biden did ask OSHA to issue an emergency temporary standard for employers with more than 100 employees. So for that, they would either have to get vaccinated or have weekly COVID tests. As you can imagine, employers don't want the burden of testing people for COVID weekly. It's much simpler for them to check off a vaccine card one time and be done with it. We've seen over the past months, and especially since the FDA gave full approval to the Pfizer vaccine, more and more companies like Disney, like Facebook, like Walmart, if you're in corporate, having vaccine requirements, or doing things like, I think it was Delta Airlines that says if you're not vaccinated, then you have to pay extra $200 a month for your health care. And so in a way, yes, this would mandate them to do that, but proponents of this say it also gives coverage to businesses, particularly businesses that are having labor shortages and want to be competitive in being able to hire people that, you know, didn't want to be the one restaurant chain, for example, that has this requirement. Well, now everyone has it. And so it doesn't put you on uneven ground if you're trying to hire. So some say that that is a benefit, that it gives that advantage and puts all employers on the same footing. Of course, many say this is huge government overreach and, you know, fascism and all these other things. There are already lawsuits being filed, including by the RNC, who employs over 100 people. So they're saying we shouldn't have to do this. I should note that Fox News does have vaccine mandates, but anyway, so that's one thing that's happening. The rule hasn't come out yet, but I'm guessing maybe we'll see that in the next week. Then through executive action, the president had the authority to, and so that's the one that's most heavily disputed about the constitutionality of it. When it comes to the executive actions for federal contractors, workers, where we disperse Medicaid and Medicare funds, Biden's on a lot more solid footing. And that would be requiring vaccines for workers at facilities that receive Medicare or Medicaid funds. And, you know, in the St. Louis region, most of the big hospital systems are already doing this. They have mandates that usually go into effect about mid-September. My partner works for SSM, and I know they have that requirement. So does BJC, so do a lot of places. And then requiring vaccine for most federal workers and contractors. That includes the 300,000 teachers in Head Start. Teachers, if it's a federally funded K through 12 school, which there are some of those would have that requirement as well. In addition, doubling fines for airline passengers who refuse to wear masks. How about a half fine for those who wear it below their nose? I don't know. And then also enacting the Defense Production Act to increase rapid testing kits. So this isn't just a one-prong approach, and you know, we've heard this from a lot of the CDC and others saying, yes, vaccines are huge. That's our biggest weapon, but we also need to continue masking and encourage that. And testing is another weapon. So if we're able to say, gosh, I have a little sniffle today, I don't know if it's seasonal allergies or a COVID test or COVID, being able to have that test at home, test your kid before you send them to school. So they are trying to ramp up the testing, home testing as well. One thing that I thought was interesting, I took a look, and since August 25th, when the order went in for the military to have vaccines, their vaccination rates have gone from 76% to about 83%, just in a couple weeks. And so that does give you some idea of how we could ramp up with some of these mandates. I do think it's important to say that, of course, the United States has required vaccines. In general, you know, they have either been, though, at the state or local level or through the military. So we've heard the George Washington example. That's the military. So most of those have been state and local level. But there is a history of OSHA being able to mandate these rules. So it's not coming directly, you know, Biden does not have the power to say everyone has to get vaccinated, but OSHA can issue workplace standards. And they've done that in other ways throughout the pandemic, including with PPE requirements and other things. But of course, this will be challenged in the courts. But as of now, the US is about to be last. We're just edging out Japan, but they're getting vaccinated at much higher rates than we are in the G7 in vaccine rates. And, you know, there are certain people that are just not moving forward. And so Biden has said from the beginning he didn't want mandates. I believe that's true, but I think he's at the point now that he's just trying to figure out a way to get us past this. And when we look at polling, this is Gallup polling about these vaccination requirements, you can see that over the last several months, if anything, they've gotten more popular. So travel by airplane, do you favor oppose vaccine requirements? That is uptick to 61%, stay in a hotel, 53%, attend events with large crowds, 58%, which we know a lot of the venues in St. Louis have been doing that on their own. Dine in a restaurant, 53%, and for work, 56% supported that. We can, of course, break that down a bit. I thought it was interesting. I like this. They didn't just have Democrats, Republicans, and independents, but they also did it by vaccine status. And so you can see here when you look at go to the office or work site, the bottom there, Only 10% of unvaccinated Republicans support that. A larger percentage, 38% of vaccinated Republicans support that. Unvaccinated independents, very low, but vaccinated independents, majority. And among Democrats who are vaccinated or unvaccinated, strong support. And then this is one other aspect I want to look at, because so much controversy. I mean, we see these school board meetings and other things that are happening, and so much controversy around what should we be doing in schools. And so this polling takes a look at, should teachers have to get vaccinated, and breaks the respondents down by a lot of demographic factors. And should students who are 12 and older have to be vaccinated? And so you can take a look. Probably most of this isn't surprising. A lot of it falls along where you would think, but overall, a majority do support teachers and students having vaccine requirements. To get any of these things enacted, whether it is the infrastructure plan, masking, vaccines, some other things we're going to talk about. Of course, the president needs to have political capital. We know that his approval rating, it was staying around between 53 and 55%. So this is from 538. So they average out all the polls, so you don't just get sort of one outlying poll. So this is the average of polling over Biden's tenure so far. And recently, for the first time, a majority disapprove of his performance. That was spurred in some ways by what we saw happening in Afghanistan. Although most Americans support getting out of Afghanistan, the way that it happened and the images that we saw were not helpful at all for Biden's approval ratings. Now, if you're in the Biden administration, it might be comforting to know that Americans put little stock in foreign policy overall when they're voting, and that there's going to be quite a bit of time between those images we saw and the midterm elections. Of course, you can expect to see some of those playing on commercials and ads. But that did give Biden a hit. Also, what's happening with the pandemic has negatively affected his polling. And that only does Biden's stance matter right now for things he's trying to get done. In general, the president's approval ratings affect the midterm elections. So Gallup finds that presidents who have approval ratings below 50%, on average, their party loses 37 House seats in the midterms. And if a president has approval above 15%, they still lose seats, but only about 14. And so it definitely affects the prospects for midterms. Now, we're still a ways out from midterms, but we saw this effect in 2018 with the Republicans losing 40 seats. So this is our current divide in the House. Democrats have a narrow margin, but Republicans only need to flip 5 seats in the midterms to have control of the House. Another way to think about this is looking at swing districts. So this survey was done by the American Action Network, which is a right-leaning organization, but they did polling August 28th through 30th. In these swing districts that are currently held by Democrats. So when we're thinking of how will Democrats do in the midterm elections, this is one indicator. Now, we are a year out, but as of now, Biden's job approval in these districts is underwater in every one of these swing districts. So that's something that has a lot of Democrats' concern. Once I'm done here, if you want me to post in the chat, this survey looked at a lot of things, and they did matchups against the incumbent and like generic Republican, and the generic Republicans were faring well against the incumbent Democrats in these districts. So that's something definitely the Democrats are looking at, and the Republicans. And when we think about the midterms, one aspect is the census. So as you know, the 2020 census was a mess. It was, the pandemic, the Trump administration's efforts to exclude undocumented immigrants and to change questions. So all of these things combined to delay the release of the census data by about 4 months later than we would normally get it. Some of the things that we found in this census is that large counties with over 50,000 residents are growing the most, and smaller counties are shrinking. We also see here that by region, the West and the South are growing more than the Midwest and Northeast. If you think about red states and blue states, you do see a lot of growth there in red states. You see loss in Illinois, smaller growth in California, so some of the bigger Democratic strongholds. And then Texas actually led the country in population growth. They grew by about 373,000 residents. And of course, we're going to talk more about Texas later. Also, the white share of the population has fallen below 60%. So you can see previous census data and how that has fallen pretty dramatically. Now, part of that is because of how that we are now able to identify as more than one race, but that is a big difference there. And the under 18 population is now majority people of color, about 53%. So two states that we're concerned about are Missouri and Illinois. So Missouri did have population growth, but our growth was about 2.77%. Less than the about 7.6% average growth. Utah had the highest growth, followed by Idaho, Texas in percent. Texas grew the most in raw numbers. Utah grew the most in percent of population. And so Missouri and Illinois each dropped one spot as far as how they rank in the highest population states. But Illinois actually had a net loss in population. So there's a lot on this one slide. First of all, you see over here on the upper right map, this is our current districts. So the good news is, even though our population growth was less than the national average, we did not lose a seat this time. We probably remember how painful it was to lose a seat last time. So we did not lose a seat, we still have 8. When it comes to redistricting in Missouri, the state legislature, there's 2 different processes. We have one process for congressional redistricting, and we have a different process for the state legislature to redistrict for the Missouri House and Senate. And so I'll talk a little bit more about both of those. And so currently, Missouri has 2 Democratic seats, the 5th and 1st district, and the other 6 are held by Republicans. This, underneath it, shows you the vote share in the 2020 presidential election to kind of show the proportion of Missourians who voted Democratic versus Republican was about 41 to 57. But our proportion of seats in the House are not equivalent to that. So the Republicans have a distinct advantage in drawing districts. Part of that too is where people live. Rural areas, so there's an advantage in the House because people in rural areas are spread out further. And Democrats tend to be more packed into more urban and suburban areas for drawing those districts. Also, you've got to give it to the Republicans. About 15, 20 years ago, they really figured out we've got to start winning state houses and control the redistricting process. And they did it, and it's been very effective. And so I'll drop this link in the chat too when I'm finished, but this is kind of interesting. You can go to this website and you can look at the current maps for Missouri, both the congressional map and then our state Senate and state House. You can tinker around with how you might redraw districts, and then they show you districts. What are the best ways to draw it if you want the highest minority representation? If you want actual competitive districts, which we do not have, if you want the most proportional, what would that look like? And so it's sort of interesting to play around with that a bit as well. So I can drop that in the chat when I'm finished here. So redistricting in Missouri. So I would say some of the highlights are that the 1st district was among the top 10 nationally in declining population from the 2010 census to the 2020 census. So that's bad news for St. Louis. Population in the first district declined from 748,000 to 714,000 over that time period. So that district was drawn in a negotiation in the 60s to make that a majority minority district. So a district that would give an African-American in the 60s a real chance to win, which Bill Clay did win, and the Clays held that seat until Cori Bush. It's the only district in Missouri with a plurality of Black voters. And the population loss will mean that that first district boundaries are going to extend into the suburbs, likely partially into St. Charles County, which they're fighting, or into Jefferson County. It will still, likely be a Democratic district, but it will change certainly the racial dynamics of that district. The other democratically held district, the 5th, is not majority Black, but the representative from that district is African-American. The 1st and 8th districts both now are 40,000 short of the federally required population. So those districts have to be redrawn to include more residents, which means that other districts will be reshaped based on that. The 3rd district, which is a lot of St. Charles, saw the biggest growth in the state. So they went from about 748,000 to 804,000 over that same time period. If we have to redraw the 1st district, of course, that means it's going to affect the 2nd district. While the 2nd district hasn't sent a Democrat to Congress since 1990, there have been some strong challenges I know folks in this meeting were really working hard on in 2018 and 2020. But likely the 2nd district will be redrawn to be more solidly Republican. For Democrats, the worst case, the nightmare scenario, is that these districts are redrawn in a way that the 5th district is split up and becomes a Republican district. So we end up a 7-1 split. I don't necessarily think that will happen, but that is sort of the nightmare scenario that people are worried about. What will likely happen is Republicans will focus more so on drawing the 2nd district, so it's not competitive anymore. Not good news for you all, I know. So that's all drawing congressional districts. That is done by the Missouri State Legislature. When it comes to drawing our state Senate and House districts, our state legislative districts, that's where Clean Missouri was passed. That was going to change the process, not for congressional districts, but for the state House and Senate. So that was passed to say we should have a nonpartisan demographer draw these districts and to include factors like partisan fairness and racial equity. And it was passed. And then in 2020, the Republicans in the Missouri State Legislature decided they did not like that and did not want that to be the process. So they put an amendment on the ballot, which voters also approved. And basically that put our redistricting process back to what it used to be. And what that is we have these commissions that are made up of half Democrats, half Republicans. There's 20 members, and they have to draw a map and get 70% agreement. As you can imagine, it's not easy to get a group that's split 50-50 by party to get 70% agreement. And so that means it doesn't happen. I believe 5 of the last 6 maps they drew, they were unable to get that agreement. And so when they can't reach that level of consensus, then the redistricting process goes to a panel of judges. And that is how our state House and state Senate districts have been drawn the majority of the time since 1990, is actually by a panel of judges appointed by the Missouri State Supreme Court. They end up redistricting. Okay, so we can talk more about any of that later in the Q&A. So in light of how Missouri tried to change our redistricting process and then changed it back before it was in place, I thought you might be interested to see a map of how the districts are drawn. So in the red states, Republicans control that redistricting process like they do here in Missouri. In blue states, Democrats control that process. In pink, it's a split. And then in the yellow states, they have independent commissions. And that's what we've seen a movement towards, even though it was thwarted in Missouri. So since our last census, this is how control of the map, so for congressional redistricting, has changed. That the number of states where the Republicans control the process has increased by 1, but the number of districts that they control the process because of population shifts has actually decreased. And we've seen that increase in independent commissions. So I guess from a Democratic standpoint, this would be a little glimmer of hope in redistricting. And the other thing to consider is when we have changes in the census, changes in redistricting, that also affects the Electoral College. And so when we see the population change in the Electoral College and the reallocation of those House seats, that affects the number of votes they have. And so we see California losing a vote, Illinois losing a vote in the Electoral College, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, all losing votes in the Electoral College. On the blue side, only Colorado and Oregon gaining. And then on the Republican side, you see Florida, Texas, and Montana and North Carolina all gaining seats, Ohio and West Virginia losing. So that comes out for a +3 for the Republicans and a minus for the Democrats. So just a reminder, the Electoral College vote in 2020 was Dems 306 and Republicans 232. And then since we've talked about every other race, even though it's a ways off, I thought I would just briefly touch on the Missouri Senate race, and we can talk more in the Q&A if you'd like. But as you know, Missouri has a vacant seat with Roy Blunt stepping down, saying he's not going to seek re-election. And so with the open seat, this is a hot race, particularly a lot of excitement on the Republican side. You know, we saw Mark McCluskey and Eric Greitens, you know, people who have resigned, who have felonies, you know, are part of the front runners of this. We also see, you know, we see congressmen and women also running, and another front runner would be the Missouri Attorney General. I think a lot of the Republican establishment, you know, likes the idea of Eric Schmidt running. So far, this race is largely a race to out-Trump each other. Eric Greitens so far not only is polling the best, but is winning the race to the bottom by bragging about not being vaccinated, by hiring Donald Trump Jr.'s girlfriend as his campaign manager. So he's really, I think, seeking to get that Trump endorsement. And from everything we see, that would likely play well in Missouri. A side note, there's no love lost between Josh Hawley and Eric Greitens, interestingly enough. They are not fans of each other, which goes back to Greitens' time as governor. The Democrats are also seeing this as an opportunity. I would say the front runners would be Scott Sifton and Kuntz at this point. They're leading the fundraising, the last numbers that I saw. And the problem here so far for the Democrats is having someone with statewide name recognition. I mean, on top of the fact that Democrats have just struggled in statewide races in Missouri in recent years, you know, getting the name out, getting statewide recognition. Kuntz is really running on a more populist basis with military experience. Sifton, I think, has a more built-in base automatically and a bit more of an infrastructure and recognition in Missouri, but we're going to see this one flush out, and we might see some more people jump in the race. Of course, the big name folks that everyone was buzzing about early on, including, you know, everyone from Claire McCaskill to Jay Nixon, have all said they will not be running for this seat. St. Louis University and YouGov did some recent polling that I thought was interesting, so I thought I'd share it with you. So they asked favorable versus unfavorable about the front-running candidates here. So you can see the one with the highest favorable ratings at this time is Eric Greitens. The margin of error in this poll was 4%. But so that puts him pretty closely with some of the others. But yeah, he has the highest favorable ratings out of all the candidates at this time. Overall, too, I thought it was interesting that Governor Parsons' approval rating has grown over the last year, a 5.7% increase in his approval rating from Missourians. The majority of voters, these were among likely voters, the majority of voters approve of his handling of the pandemic, and that has gotten better over the last year. 54% of Missouri voters disapprove of President Biden's performance as president. And Josh Hawley's approval rating has also gone up in Missouri in the last year. So when you think of the events of the last year, including, the violence at the Capitol, including the handling of the pandemic, those don't seem to have hurt Parson or Hawley at all in Missouri. And other key findings from policy-wise from this, and again, if anyone wants this poll, let me know and I can drop it in the chat. There's a lot more things they asked about. 62% of Missouri voters think the state should fund Medicaid expansion, and this polling was all done in August, and 24% of voters in Missouri do not plan to get the COVID-19 vaccine, and an additional 10% are unsure. So we're looking at least a third of Missouri voters who say that they're not likely to get the vaccine. Now, if they have to get it to keep their job, will that change? I guess we'll find out. And Medicaid expansion. Missouri voters approved Medicaid expansion in August 2020, and immediately, Missouri Republican lawmakers were coming out against it, saying they wouldn't fund it. We saw all kinds of hijinks earlier this year with the FRA tax and attempts to not fund contraception for Medicaid recipients and all kinds of things. But ultimately, those provisions did not go in. The Supreme Court upheld the expansion, said that it was constitutional. For Medicaid expansion, the federal government will pay for 90% and the state only has to pay for 10%. So overall, states have seen not only an expansion of healthcare and a decrease in disparities and better health outcomes, but they've seen cost savings. Medicaid expansion in Missouri should open up the program to about 275,000 Missourians. So what it would open it up to is people who make up to 138% of the poverty level, which is about $17,800 a year for an individual or $36,000 for a family of 4. This is a huge change because previously in Missouri, a single mom with 1 child had to make less than $3,000 a year to qualify for Medicaid. And childless adults were not eligible in Missouri. So this is a huge change for hundreds of thousands of Missourians. So Missouri started accepting applications on August 10th because they have tons of administrative hurdles because they refused to hire staff, invest in software, or fund this. They won't be able to begin processing applications until October 1st, but that will be retroactive to July 1st. So people should be able to get reimbursed for some of those things that happened, but it's not going to be an easy process. It's going to be bureaucratic, it's going to be confusing, and they're going to make lots of mistakes in the beginning, which is unfortunate because we should have been gearing up for this for the last year, but instead we're scrambling to figure out how to implement it at the last minute. And lastly, we have to talk about what's going on with reproductive rights. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the Texas law that bans most abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. It is not unusual in the last decade or so for conservative states like Missouri to pass these sorts of laws. So, Missouri passed the 8-week law. We see others with 15-week laws. So that's not what's unusual. What's unusual is this is the first one that's actually went into effect. Those other laws were challenged in the courts and the courts stopped them. And this one, that did not happen. And it was, you can call it cunning, I suppose, novel approach has been used many times, to how to craft this law so it could escape judicial review for constitutionality. And that's what they seem to have effectively done at this point. So instead of typically what happens is a law goes into effect. You know, why Roe v. Wade is called Roe v. Wade is because Wade was the Texas person in charge with enforcing this, the government official. And in this case, since government officials are banned from enforcing this, the question is, who has standing? Who can you sue? So they tried to sue, opponents tried to sue clerks and judges because they said they would be, in effect, the ones enforcing this suit. But the Supreme Court did not accept that argument. So this law has went into effect. According to abortion providers, it will prevent 85% of abortions being provided in Texas. I see a majority of women on this one. We all know that many women do not know they're pregnant at 6 weeks, much less are able to make that determination, make a decision about what they should do, get the money together, make an appointment, travel. Texas is a huge state. You can have to drive hours and hours to get to the nearest clinic. Appointments can be backed up. So this, in effect, makes it almost impossible to get an abortion in Texas. And this has went into action. So basically this law deputizes vigilantes and gives them a $10,000 bounty to sue anyone. They can't sue the abortion patient themselves, but they can sue anyone who performs or aids with the abortion or who conspires to, right? So that could be a counselor, that could be someone who gives a woman money towards an abortion, someone who drives her there, the doctor who performs it, the clinics. And I mean, this law was crafted, oh boy, they left no detail out to advantage the anti-abortion forces. And so it bars the court. So now it gives $10,000 to the plaintiff if they're upheld, and it reimburses their legal fees. But the defendants, it bars them from getting their legal fees, even if they want. So if you are Planned Parenthood of Eastern Texas and you get sued because of one abortion, anyone can sue you, and they can sue you multiple times. So the legal fees alone would be prohibitive. And even if you win, those would not be reimbursed. So thus, providers have stopped performing abortions after 6 weeks. So normally, another way to do this is, so a provider would go ahead and perform that abortion in week 8. Someone would file that lawsuit against them. And then the defendant would say, this law is unconstitutional. I want to challenge it in the courts. But because you've basically just seen a stop on abortion services, that's not even happening to take it into the courts that way. And there are no exceptions for rape and incest. These are some highlights from the law when it comes to how defendants can defend themselves and how they cannot. So they cannot use as defense ignorance, a mistake of law, the belief that this is unconstitutional. They cannot assert the standing of the rights of the woman as part of their defense. So, I mean, they have really got down to every detail to make sure that there is no way for the defense to get out of this, and to make it so the legal fees, they're not even willing to try challenging this at this point. There is some concern among some conservatives that there will be the backlash in Texas by corporations and travel and other organizations, sort of like we saw in North Carolina with their transgender bathroom laws. Texas has tried to make itself a tech hub, and you can see this is the change in tech jobs that they've had. My brother lived in Austin, and we saw that firsthand, but a lot of tech companies are already saying, we have real concerns about this, or telling their female employees they will cover the costs to send them out of state, which of course then they could be sued. So, you know, there is potential for backlash on this, but I don't think that will change the position of the hardcore folks who enacted this law. The Supreme Court was, in some ways, shocking and disappointing in the fact that they took a tack that they haven't taken with any other law that have been less restrictive. But in the flip side, it's the first time that we've sort of seen this 6-3 majority doing this. Sorry, I think my phone's talking to me. The 6-3 majority making these types of decisions around abortion. And we saw John Roberts siding with the liberals, but still not enough to tip the scales because of the Merrick Garland delay that ended up in Neil Gorsuch, and because of the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that gave us Amy Coney Barrett. And so the court, of course, said that they're not saying the law is not unconstitutional. They're not deciding a constitutional matter. This is just a procedural decision, and it had to do with standing. But that doesn't change the reality of they chose to let this law go into place that prevents women in Texas from accessing their constitutional rights. And they have stopped other laws like COVID era laws that would prohibit religious gatherings. They put injunctions on those laws, but chose not to do that in this case. While I do think this case will eventually get overturned, both because of the way that it is, what it does put an undue burden, like it was established under Casey. It doesn't uphold the viability aspect that was established under Casey. And because of the way that it empowers vigilantes and bounties in the state. Imagine if New York implemented a gun law like that. I can imagine the Supreme Court would have put an injunction in place to hold off on that. And so I think it will be overturned, but in the meantime, that doesn't help women who are on a time frame, right? You only have so much time in which to make these decisions that have lifelong impacts on women in Texas, women and families. So the other thing I think we're waiting on is to see in this Supreme Court term, they will be deciding on a Mississippi law, which forbids almost all abortions after 15 weeks. So that's something that we're definitely going to be watching to see how they decide in that. And I think I kind of touched on this. So we're going to probably see state courts go through this Texas Constitution issue. The Department of Justice is suing Texas. And sometimes when the government, the federal government, rather than organizations and individuals sue, they have more standing here. So it's possible that could make some ground. But of course, in the meantime, other states have passed heartbeat laws. In Missouri in 2019, we had this 8-week abortion ban, which is one of the most restrictive ones in the nation, but it's not been implemented because it's been challenged in court. Republican officials in many states, including Missouri, have suggested they might change their laws to mirror this legislation in Texas, even if it's only implemented for a month or 4 months or 6 months or a year. We know how long it takes to get through the court system. That's a win for these folks. So another thing I've noticed is there's not a lot of outspoken Republicans in the US Congress talking about this. They're being quieter. And I think that they're fearing the backlash and how this can motivate voters, and particularly those voters we were talking about in 2020, those suburban women. Overall, when we look at abortion laws, there have been 90 restrictions enacted this year already. And I think that was as of the end of August. And that surpasses the record count for 2011, when for the whole year, there were 89 restrictions enacted, and we're clearly not through this year. And this is going to embolden many anti-abortion legislators and organizations. And, as we saw in Missouri earlier this year, it doesn't stop at just abortion. There are also restrictions that are trying to be implemented on contraception as well. So in total, state legislatures have enacted over 1,300 restrictions since Roe v. Wade, including 573 since 2011. So I was just going to wrap up here by taking a look at public opinion on abortion rights in the US. So the majority of US adults say abortion should be legal in most or all cases. You can break that down by religious, and you can see that there is a difference on that, with certainly Buddhist and Jewish Americans being most supportive, followed by Hindu, mainline Protestant, and unaffiliated religious. But then you get the folks like evangelical Protestants, who are a big part of the Republican voting base, with the vast majority thinking that abortion should be illegal in all or most cases. We can look at that by party ideology. And so when we look at Democrats, you see overwhelmingly liberal Democrats supporting it, about 73% of more moderate Democrats, and a majority of moderate Republicans. But then you have that chunk of conservative Republicans where there's only about 20% who say that abortion should be legal. By gender, you don't see maybe as much difference as you would expect, where you see it's more so based in ideology and party than in gender when you look at support or opposition for abortion. And you can look at this by race and ethnicity as well, with Asian and Black Americans being more likely to support it, but still a majority of white and Hispanic supporting abortion. And then by age, the younger you are, the more likely you are to say that abortion should be legal, and older folks being more likely, and actually the 50 to 64 having the least level of support. And then by education level, with college graduates being much more likely to support abortion rights, and only about half people who graduated high school or less, about 50-50. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now and turn it back to you all.
Okay, I've got one question in the chat box. This goes back to the 10 swing districts that you pointed out, one of whom is my sister's in Florida. So this would be of interest to her. What do we know? Do we know what the issues are that would cause Biden to lose support in those swing districts?
That's a good question. I would suspect it's the same issues that are contributing to his decline in support overall, which seem to be primarily driven by COVID and economic concerns, which are tied up together. Because he was surging, in late spring, early summer, his approval ratings were at some of their highest points when people are feeling optimistic about vaccines, about getting back to normal life. But as that has been the opposite in this summer, those have dropped. I think the Afghanistan effect is there, but I don't think that will be lasting. I think that he'll probably rebound from that one. Yeah, but the mask mandates, the fights that are going on in schools, they say all politics is local. I think all of this is affecting Biden's overall approval.
Thank you for a great in-depth presentation on so many issues. Here's another question. Is there any chance that an inheritance tax on super high wealth be part of the pay for the infrastructure bill?
Yeah, so, the estate tax is always a debate. And I do think that is on the table. It's part of the taxes that are being discussed. There's such misperception. And when you look at any public opinion polling on the estate tax, people overall oppose it because they think, well, I don't want to be taxed on this wealth I pass on to my kids, but they don't realize 90+% of us will not be. It is for the very, very wealthy. So I do think that will be considered in this.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any more. Somebody else has a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it. Oh, Grace?
Yes,
Grace?
I was wondering, what's your take or what you're thinking about the recall of Newsom in California?
Yeah, that's something else I was thinking of. There's so much to talk about and I didn't want to talk you all to death. Yes, I think that's important to watch. It seems like it's looking a little better for Newsom over the last week or so. Democrats are making every effort possible to get this, not just because it can be seen as a harbinger for the midterms or just because they want to keep that governorship, but also because the prospect that the California governor will appoint someone to replace Senator Feinstein, and that could tip the balance in the Senate. So it's really important for a lot of reasons. It's not unusual for Californians to try to recall their governor. And I think there were 4 or 5 failed attempts so far to recall Newsom. This one actually didn't meet the original deadline to recall him either, but they extended it because of the pandemic. I think they extended their petitioning for 120 days, and that's when they were able to meet the threshold. And why that happened is California, and I have lots of friends who live there, had, if you ask me, appropriate and strict COVID measures in place. And then when he was seen out to a fancy dinner with no mask and other people got pissed off. And so that really kind of put it over the top, I think, with the petition for the recall election. But I do think it's important to watch, and it's going to be about voter turnout. And if you see the front runner who's a Republican in California, yeah, I see head shaking. So you know it's an important race.
Not impressed.
Yeah.
Not impressed.
He's already started engaging in the big lie part.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
I have one more question.
Oh, Kathy, there you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have heard an argument that, I haven't heard it pursued, but I heard an argument that, let's say that I am a perfect kidney match to my daughter or my uncle or whoever. I cannot be forced to donate a kidney, even if I'm a perfect match. Why then can a woman be forced to carry a child against her will? Has anybody pursued this from just a body autonomy type of an angle?
Certainly there's like a whole, approach about bodily autonomy. And if you notice, some of the Texas state legislatures are not referring to women as women. They're calling them host bodies. I mean, I even heard a reporter say very nicely, you know what, many people will probably object to you referring to these people as host bodies. Like the woman is not her own autonomous human. She's just there to grow this other fetus. So yeah, I think that that's a real issue, and that they're intentionally trying to dehumanize women and take the focus off someone's own autonomy. And you're just a host to this other being that you could grow.
Okay. Well, we really appreciate you joining us this morning, Dr. Mannion, and we hope to see you on TV soon.
Yes, it's nice to see you all.
When I see you on Channel 5, that lady has spoken to West County Democrats. Like,
yes,
like I'm a groupie or something. Really marginally embarrassing. We really appreciate you being here, and continue on with your work. As a former educator, I appreciate what you do.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the work you all are doing as well. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Okay, Glenn, would you care to fill in any gaps? I don't know if Dr. Mannion left us any gaps, but
unfortunately there are a few. And if you're expecting good news, you might want to turn on TV and go to WeTV and watch one of the situation comedies. First off, as Dr. Mannion was saying, the worst case scenario for a Trump-formed Supreme Court, it turned out, was understated. Things are bad now, and they're going to get worse. Also, we have this trend led by Eric Schmidt and some of the other Republican attorney generals to seize control back from the federal government to the states. In Missouri, we're trying to do it on guns. They're talking about doing it on COVID and other issues. But basically, any topic that appeals to the Trump base is now fair game for political action rather than good jurisprudence. As the doctor said, the entire $3.5 trillion infrastructure plan now rests on Joe Manchin. And if you saw his appearances on the Sunday shows and the things he said, it's not looking good. The worst part is that many Republicans, except for maybe a few of the ultra conservatives, would like to see the $3.5 trillion plan pass because it brings billions and billions of dollars to their home states. But they can't risk voting for anything Democratic or anything that Trump opposes. So it's weird. We have everybody wanting to get to heaven, but nobody willing to die. We have everybody wanting the money from the infrastructure, no one willing to vote for it. As I was the one who asked the question about the inheritance tax. One interesting factor in this discussion of raising monies to pay for the infrastructure bill, we now see former moderate and in one case even liberal Democrats working as lobbyists against that proposal. The rich have the money to hire all the lobbyists and lawyers they need, and they're going to be using them. If not for the Joe Manchin situation, that's what we'd be talking about on this bill, the concerted pressure from the ultra wealthy and from big business to avoid those tax increases. Now, no matter what Congress finds with their January 6th commission, it is unlikely that's going to change the mind of Trump or his followers. The problem is Republicans still claim to be the party of law and order, and yet they are probably going to be nominating for several House of Representatives seats people who are January 6th deniers. There are some Republicans in prominent positions who say all charges against the demonstrators, even people close to where the Capitol policemen were killed, should be dropped because of a political demonstration that got out of hand because of Antifa and other liberals. That's going to be very, very rough on all of us in the coming months. On the good news front, through a little bit of obscure administrative rulemaking and a lot of hard work behind the scenes, the Biden administration has made major changes to the food stamp program, which will result in a lot more money for working poor families to have at the grocery store. To put things in perspective, though, we're not talking about giving people so much money they're going to have steak on the table every night. No, we're talking about raising them, closing the gap between the thrifty food plan, which is totally unrealistic, and the moderate cost food plan, which is closer to what most of us have. Most families on food stamps nationwide will still require help from food pantries, but these changes will put a lot more money in people's pocket, give them a lot more dignity because they're buying more of their own food, and it will take some strain off the food pantry system. If you noticed, we had a major hurricane hit Louisiana. Because of improvements to the Louisiana levee system, paid for during and built during the Obama administration, because of changes to FEMA, including a gut rehab of the structure since the George W. Bush days, they had about as much damage in many ways in Louisiana, but they didn't get the flooding. They had a horrible storm, but because the federal government did a better job at its work, we didn't have the suffering and so on we had with Katrina. And that story about what didn't happen is going to get missed. But remember, it was the Obama administration and continuation of that by the Biden administration, which basically means there's still a Louisiana down there, not just one big, pool of water right now. State issues. The Parson administration does not feel bound by the decisions of Missouri courts. We saw that in Medicaid expansion. We saw it earlier on the lawsuit brought by corrections officers, where the state still has not paid the money the state owes those officers. We've also seen the Parson administration trampling the rights of unionized state workers. The problem is, in this state, in this political climate, he can do that because there's no one to stop him. He ignores the courts, and there's no one to make him comply. Now, here's a shocking discovery. Missouri actually has money right now. As Tracy and others who were very involved with that budget can tell you, for years, the Republicans did everything they could to starve the beast. Well, between two things happening, one, the pandemic and all the federal funds coming in, and two, the fact that Missouri actually kept last fiscal year open for taxpayers for an extra 3 months, from April into July, 4 months. That meant that the state of Missouri actually has the money to fully fund education, invest hundreds of millions of dollars or even $1 billion in roads, and do many other proactive, logical things. They won't do it, but they could, because Missouri actually has money in the bank right now. Now, by my count, about 24 topics for special sessions were proposed. It appears the governor is going to have to call a special session for the congressional redistricting. However, in the last few days, the governor has said he's going to call a special session, not on economic development or any of the other things people propose, but on a state response to overturn the rules that the doctor presented about Biden's changes for COVID management. In other words, once again, the governor of the state of Missouri is going to allege that the state of Missouri is not bound by federal law, federal order, or the ERISA regulations. In other words, the state of Missouri is going to pass a special session to pass a law saying we don't want masks, we don't want to make people get shots, we don't want people to get well. And again, they got by with it with the Second Amendment Preservation Act. There are deputies now pulling people over by the side of the road on the interstates. And these are out-of-state people who have guns. And the deputies are being told, do not query the federal system to see if they are felon in possession of a firearm, because sheriffs and police chiefs are terrified of getting on the wrong side and getting that $50,000 fine because of the Second Amendment Preservation Act. With Clean Missouri replaced by Dirty Missouri, the process of drawing those congressional lines is going to be very, very messy. As one thing we have to remember too, that wasn't covered in the talk, was that there's a movement among Republicans in St. Charles County. St. Charles County has not had a congressperson from their county in this past century. There are a lot of Republicans who want the second district to be St. Charles centric. In other words, the 404,000, 405,000 people in St. Charles would form the core of a new second district. If they add the 100,000 people in Franklin County and some of the other collar counties, it is possible that they could draw a congressional district where the second district's congressional line could be as far west as Highway 141. Remember, the first congressional district lost people, and the 8th congressional district down across the southern part of Missouri lost people. That could push the 8th further closer to St. Louis, but the big thing is it could allow for a second district to be drawn to where it would be next to impossible for a Democrat from St. Louis County, unfortunately, to be super competitive, because it's going to be a St. Charles contest, it's going to be a Franklin County contest, it could be a Jefferson County contest. That is something we're going to have to see, and that's something, when the lines get to the courts, is going to have to be fought very, very hard, because otherwise we could see the St. Louis area's total representation reduced. Right now, we are all of 2 congressional districts essentially, and a big part of 2 others. We could see a situation where St. Louis County and city only dominate 1 congressional district. In other bad news, Missouri, as you heard about Medicaid, we did not increase staff, we did not prepare the software, we didn't get ready for the influx of people due to Medicaid expansion. Something worse is happening on food stamps. Nationwide, in the past year, about 11% more Americans joined the food stamp rolls. In the state of Missouri, food stamp usage is down over 10%. What that means is about 150,000 Missourians are probably eligible for food stamps and not getting them because the Department of Social Services, under the Parson administration, which is not a friend of poor people, has put up so many impediments that people can't get the help they need. If you want to impress your Republican friends, let them know because those 150,000 people aren't getting food stamps, that's $30 million a month, which isn't getting spent in Missouri grocery stores, at least $30 million a month. And again, this is federal money, federal requirements. We just aren't doing what we're supposed to help people. One problem the Department of Social Services has is they're severely understaffed. There are county level offices which have not returned to full hours, meaning people who can't apply online find themselves having to rearrange their schedule or go to another county to apply for benefits like food stamps, temporary assistance, and Medicaid. We're doing a horrible job there, and that keeps getting worse. Now, despite ending the pandemic unemployment payments early, we did not see a rush of people into jobs in Missouri. In fact, the number of job openings in Missouri continues to grow. Put that in practical matter, my wife and I go to McAllister's Deli after church every Sunday. Last week, they had a sign up. They only had half their dining room open because they were short-staffed. Yesterday we went, they were takeout only, and they were closing at 5 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. because they can't get staff. All across the state of Missouri, businesses don't have the staff to stay open. It is not because people are staying home on food stamps and unemployment. It's because there aren't enough people in the workforce for these lower paying jobs. And remember, in the next couple of months, Amazon is going to open 2 more facilities in Missouri, including one in Fenton where the Chrysler plant used to be. Amazon has sucked about 1.5 million workers out of the workforce in the last few years. When they open that plant or that building in Fenton, that distribution center, that'll be several hundred more people who won't be going to work in McAllister's Deli or McDonald's or Bank of America. So that's important. One last thing, Helena and I are on the St. Louis County Council Reapportionment Committee or Commission. You might not be surprised to learn that we took the group picture. All the Democrats were wearing masks and none of the Republicans were wearing masks. We also had a situation where the Republicans insisted on debating for about half an hour on whether a quorum should be 9 or 10 people. Remember, St. Louis County, 25 of the 28 townships voted for Joe Biden. St. Louis County delivered majorities for Claire McCaskill, for Nicole Galloway, Joe Biden, et cetera, et cetera. Yet the Republicans appear to be aiming to frustrate the system because with a fair fight, so to speak, we would have at least 4, perhaps 5 county council members who are Democrats. The Republicans are going to be pushing for gerrymandered maps, which don't give us any more than 3. Something else to consider with the data from the Census Bureau. We now know that 3 of those districts are going to be majority minority. 2 majority Black in Northeast and North Central County, and 1 majority minority, including Hispanics and Asians in Northwest County. So this is going to be an interesting time. You may hear Helena, myself, and others saying, please, we're going to try to have public hearings. We need a lot of Democrats at those public hearings to remind people that St. Louis County is Democratic and to help us build the record, build the case for a strong Democratic showing on this. Remember, St. Louis County Council those districts are determined by the people in St. Louis County. We can't do anything about the Republican majority in Jeff City. We can't do anything right now about Derby, Missouri. We can't do that much about the congressional lines, but we can hold our own here in St. Louis County. Any questions?
I don't see anything in the chat box. I believe we're all
Helena has her hand up.
very informed. Helena, did you have something? You'd have to unmute yourself. Helena,
I was trying to
unmute.
I got it. I was trying to lower my hand instead of unmute, and I did the wrong thing. Yeah, and just so you guys know what we're going to be talking about as the rationale for our maps is that we want to keep communities together. Obviously fair districting, but to keep communities together and to use geographic and municipal lines to help guide the actual lines of the districts so that we are keeping communities together. A tactic that Republicans often use to gerrymander is to divide and cut up communities. So we're the opposite of that. So if people talk to you about what we're looking to do, that's what we're looking to do. Fair districting, keep communities together.
Remember, after the 2010 census, the Republicans split Jefferson County into 3 congressional districts. They are capable of doing some really nasty things if you let them. So we're going to do everything we can to get those fair lines and clean lines. Another thing, if you look at the current county council map, a lot of those lines, especially in central and west central county, don't make a lot of sense between what's in one district and what's in another. We want to be much more predictable as well. Any other questions?
Maureen?
Did you call
Maureen?
on me? Yes, hi. Okay, 2 things. I have a question and then just an announcement. I'm curious what you're thinking about the Sherman Dogan getting into challenge Sam Page. How do you think that's going to set, or do you think Sam Page can hold on to his seat? And then secondly, October 12th, Tuesday, October 12th, Chesterfield Township Democrats is having a sort of a town hall. It's going to be more of a greeting with all 6 U.S. Senate candidates who are running. So I invite you to all join in and we'll have questions, and I'll be posting it on your website so that I hope a lot of people attend.
I suspect the person most unhappy with Shamed Dogan's announcement was Tim Fitch. It's been an open secret in Clayton that he'd like to be the next county executive as well. Remember, St. Louis County is a Democratic county. I think whoever the Democratic contender winds up being is going to have an edge. But a lot's going to depend on what happens between now and then. Right now, the Democrats in the county council are kind of like the Republicans in Jeff City. They're fighting amongst themselves more than they're fighting with the other side of the aisle. We need to get away from that. But that's going to be a big thing. You look at the basic numbers, St. Louis County is doing well. There are since the former executive went to prison, there have been no allegations of misconduct or misdeeds. They yell at each other, but they're at least doing it legally. So hopefully we can get that solved, get that temperature lowered, have a nice clean primary and a clean election.
Do you know who's going to primary in the Democrat? Do you know who's going to run? I haven't heard of anybody.
It's too early for that.
Okay.
You could run. Maureen, you could run.
Oh, yeah. I don't think so. I can barely do my 2-mile walk. No, actually, I could walk farther than that, but no.
Okay, well, I just have a couple of
Thank
things.
you. Thank you.
A couple of things in closing. I did put the address for Circle of Concern in the chat box. Remember, they are one of our primary charities from West County Dems. I hope you're still able to donate to Circle of Concern as you are able to. We have elections, board elections coming up for West County Dems in November. We are looking for volunteers to serve on the board. If you're interested, please contact one of us. If you're not interested, you may be contacted by one of us, but because we would like some additional participation from the group. Our next meeting is Monday, October 11th, and I hope you will be able to make that. Trish Gunby is going to be our speaker on October 11th. telling us about her fun in the Missouri legislature so far. And we appreciate her for volunteering to do that. In the meantime, take care. Wear your mask when you're out, and hope to see you soon.